Okay, I think we're looking pretty good. So hello, everyone. My name is Edward Perello. I'm Associate Director for Agriculture at Deep Science Ventures. My background is in biotechnology and veterinary medicine and entrepreneurship. I ran my own company for 6 years before joining DSV to build companies at the intersection of food security, biodiversity, and conservation. And I'm very, very excited to welcome you all to this webinar. It's the first webinar we've done at DSV Agriculture, and I'd like to introduce to you Will Summers. Will is an associate on the agriculture team, and he's been responsible for leading all of the work that we've been running in high-impact agricultural transplantation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Will, who will lead you through this webinar, and we'll open up for Q&A at the end. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ed. And thank you everyone for taking the time to join today. So as Ed mentioned, I'm an associate in the agriculture team at Deep Science Ventures. My background is in molecular plant biology. So I spent several years working in research, studying plant microbe interactions, before then moving into government funding. So working in the public sector for a few years on how the government in the UK funds research and innovation, before this year joining Deep Science Ventures. And so, as Ed mentioned, one of the key pieces of work I've had since joining is working on this opportunity area that I'm going to be talking about today, which is really focused upon enabling agriculture in hostile environments. And so, firstly, just for anyone who might be a bit less familiar with Deep Science Ventures and the terminology we use, I think it's important to clarify. So when I'm saying an opportunity area, what this means ultimately is a subject area that is focused on a high-level outcome. So in this case, looking at how we scale and enable agriculture in hostile environments, which we believe presents exciting opportunities for venture building, which can contribute to our wider company goals of ultimately building a world where both people and the planet can thrive. So I want to just start with a map that I think captures really the scope of this opportunity area and what it presents. So here you can see all of the regions that are colored in red, orange, or yellow are dryland regions across the globe. And these regions contain land that's either considered to be marginal and with low developmental value at the moment, or they're areas that are actually at risk of becoming so over the coming decades due to a combination of factors. So things like current agricultural practices that degrade ecosystem services, other damaging human activities, and ultimately the impact of climate change over time as well. And this spells out a potential global land use crisis. And generally speaking, these hot, arid environments are viewed as hostile. But what this obscures really is the development potential. And with the work that we've been doing, we really believe that there are both emerging and existing technologies that can be applied in novel ways that will allow us to engineer agriculture in these regions so that we can flip this view of hostility and actually facilitate productive, climate resilient cultivation that addresses the market demands across these regions, with large populations already situated there and ready to thrive. And so by solving the constraints on agriculture in these arid marginal environments, I believe we're actually presented with a global opportunity here. And so today I want to tell you firstly about Deep Science Ventures and how we work as an organization, and then some more specific details about this opportunity area that will hopefully inspire you as the experts on this subject matter to come and work with us in solving the challenges presented by this area and build impactful companies. So I'm aware that people in the audience might have varying levels of awareness around what we do at DSV and our vision for this opportunity area specifically with some of the content that we've put out on our website. So my goal really by the end of this presentation is to make sure that you firstly have a clear grasp of DSV's approach to venture building and our overarching thesis of what we're trying to achieve within the agriculture team. And this thesis, which then guided us to identifying this opportunity area as our next target for venture building. And I'd then like to give some insights to where we think the opportunities lie for new companies to impact agriculture in hostile environments, and then tell you about our recruitment process for someone to come and join us in actually making this happen. And just a note at the bottom here and a little disclaimer, I think it's important to say that within the DSV team, we're experts in venture building from various backgrounds related to agriculture, so molecular biology myself. So when thinking about specific opportunity areas, we're really acting as generalists and looking to suspend disbelief regarding what's possible by applying first principles thinking to try and understand where new solutions or constraints may be. And this is why we're now really coming to you and looking for a really talented founder with the right technical expertise to come on board with us to build something really exciting. So firstly, who are we as a company and what do we do at Deep Science Ventures? And I think the first thing that's important to highlight is Deep Science Ventures is quite unique in the way that we operate. And so fundamentally, we are a venture creator. And what this means is we recruit founder type scientists and work together with them to develop novel approaches to solve some of the biggest challenges we face for creating a sustainable and thriving future. And these novel approaches that get developed then form the basis for venture backable companies that the founder builds from scratch with our support. And so this would contrast from something like an accelerator or an incubator, where an individual would come with a company or a piece of IP that's already in place. In contrast, we're building ventures really right from the ground up in a manner that offers a number of benefits that I'll unpack for you. And with the approach we take, fundamentally what we want to achieve as a company is a future where both the humans and the planet can thrive. And so with this in mind, we really focus our work on 4 sectors. So these are computing, so thinking about tackling barriers for intelligence and automation, climate, so how we go about delivering a net zero transition, therapeutics, so trying to cure diseases with emerging techniques, and then agriculture. And we really focus on restorative cultivation, which I'll tell you more about a bit later. The first thing to say is that, so in the past 5 years, we've already built 35 companies across our 4 sectors, averaging 18 months from the incorporation of these companies to reaching technology readiness level 4. And we now have a total valuation across those companies that exceeds £210 million. And we also have 89% of our portfolio companies that we've formed remaining active. So we really believe that with the process that we're taking, we have a really good success rate with our founders for developing impactful companies. And the way that we achieve this is by firstly looking at the fundamental gaps that there are in the R&D ecosystem, which mean that solving challenges across the 4 sectors we work on is really difficult. So most of the biggest problems we face require hard IP rather than software solutions only. But the supply of new companies to take on the challenges at hand is almost entirely dependent on a small number of university spinouts. So whilst there's this exploding demand, so for example, you see $1.3 trillion of global R&D spend per annum, we have this issue of a constrained supply. So spinouts are really concentrated around a small number of universities, with an average of 150 spinouts per year across the top 10 UK and US institutions, with only a small percentage of those going on to achieve a sector level impact. And there are really kind of 4 key factors that lie behind these constraints. So the siloing of knowledge, so the barriers created when you have a lack of intentional mechanisms for knowledge and talent transfer between different areas of research that limit the sharing of ideas. There's also this tendency for tech and IP push, so where a technology or an invention is developed, which then the kind of problem is sought after the technology is being created, which can lead to a misalignment of incentives. There can also be challenges of bureaucracy when you're dealing with large institutions. So this can impact long lead-in times and diminished agility. And then finally, there's the risk of searching for silver bullet solutions. So capital and talent and buyers tend to aggregate around a few isolated solutions without that complex appreciation of the value chains in the ecosystem that will need to exist within to have a real impact. And so DSV has been built with the aim of addressing these gaps. And so fundamentally, the way DSV works is to focus first on examining the challenge or the opportunity, and then working backwards from that point to uncover the most promising solutions to enable our desired outcome, rather than working forwards from a technology. And this means that all of the companies we build are framed around this solution pull, which really helps to de-risk our ventures by helping ensure that closer product to market fit, rather than requiring founders to pivot over time as they figure out that fit. And so this creates a really attractive proposition to both founders and investors in deep tech when developing new companies. And the other key feature is that as we build our portfolio companies, we make sure that we collaborate with relevant partners across academic, public and private sectors, so that the resultant company is designed for maximum impact within that wider ecosystem, rather than being constrained due to any misalignments with the broader picture. And so with those guiding principles, we've developed a proprietary venture building process that we call DSV Alpha. And this can be broken down into 8 stages. And so the first 4 stages that we have here are handled in-house by our core team. And this is really focused upon identifying an opportunity area and the right founder to work within that opportunity area. So at step 1, we work to identify sector level areas that are underperforming relative to what's possible. So this can be really big picture challenges, say, for example, water efficiency in agriculture, which presents a whole set of different challenges in different contexts across the globe. Then we go about forming partnerships with mission-aligned groups to gain their input into shaping specific opportunity areas in companies with their networks and knowledge and experience, from which we then move to point 3, which is where we identify specific opportunity areas. So areas that we feel confident would benefit from our methodology. So these could be specific topic areas like precision pest control, soil regeneration, or in this case, agriculture in hostile environments. And ultimately, what we're looking for here is areas that fulfill our criteria, which include things like the market potential, the human and planetary outcomes that can be delivered by solving problems in this area, and the identification of areas of neglect that present opportunities for novel solutions to have real impact in that area. And so once we're confident in an opportunity area, we then move on to step 4, which is finding the right founder. So looking for an individual with strong entrepreneurial characteristics, unbiased by particular IP, but with a deep technical knowledge that's relevant to that opportunity area. And so once we've brought that founder on board, they then push forward through the following 4 stages, so steps 5 to 8. And this is really focused on deconstructing the opportunity area in detail to build a company from scratch. So that step 5 is that deconstruction. So the founder takes a first principles approach to really try and understand the past failures of companies trying to solve the challenges in an area, thinking about areas of neglect, so where potential solutions have been overlooked for whatever reason, and then building potential approaches with consultation from advisors and other contacts to start building out approaches that can form a venture backable company. And that loop is applied several times. Sorry, Ed, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, one of the things I just want to raise for the audience is that you might be thinking to yourself, oh, I'd love to do this, but I don't really have any experience of running a company or founding an enterprise or anything like that. But all of the material that Will is going to talk about in the next few minutes, I think if that really starts to resonate with you and you want to take that leap, that's exactly the kind of people that we tend to work with at DSV. First-time founders that really want to have a dialogue with this material, take some of the ideas that we've developed and tell us why we're wrong, so that we can then help you craft that into an ideal company.
Yeah, Absolutely. Thanks, Ed. And so once you, as a founder working with us, have developed a short list of approaches that you think is really exciting, you then start building out your team. And so that could involve firstly bringing on a co-founder to fill any gaps in terms of either technical or commercial expertise to get the company off the ground. And then steps 7 and 8 are really focused on then integrating proven knowledge and IP components to test the riskiest aspects of the company at the earliest stage. And then from that point, the company is launched, and with receiving £250,000 of pre-seed investment from us at that point of incorporation, with founder-friendly terms to get you off the ground with your company. So that's the company-wide approach that we take, and we apply this within the DSV agriculture team to really focus on transforming the agriculture sector by enabling regenerative cultivation. So the first thing to say is that regenerative cultivation as a phrase can carry quite a lot of assumptions. And so I think it's important to define our thinking here. So our view when we're talking about regenerative cultivation is really thinking about moving production systems to a place where they're no longer unsustainable and extractive in their relationship with the ecosystems and the ecosystem services that they depend upon. But we're really technology agnostic in terms of the means to achieve this, and believe actually that you should be making use of the full toolbox available to you to achieve those end goals, wherever those tools may lie. But ultimately, anything that we build should be scalable so as to create impact and provide solutions that compare ecosystem service restoration with yield improvement for agricultural customers. So that's the absolute key here. And this can be done either by creating agricultural systems with increased independence from natural environments, or fostering beneficial relationships that provide positive feedback loops between agriculture and the natural environment it interacts with. And ultimately, this then creates the ability to meet growing productivity demands in the face of a changing climate, whilst also reducing industrial extraction from the wild. And alongside these fundamental principles in our team, we also apply our thinking through a bioregional lens. And so when I say this, we're simply thinking about a bioregion as a framework that allows you to look at geographical areas as they're defined by ecological systems they contain. So incorporating terrestrial, marine, freshwater environments into a single view, rather than thinking about political boundaries. And the biome contained with any system is obviously adapted to the specific climate, meaning you can start to draw out commonalities that are surfaced across different continents where the same bioregional features arise. And so by taking this approach, you can start to think about developing agricultural themes for venture building. So thinking about temperate agriculture as an example, so that we can identify big problems with connected thinking between agriculture and the ecosystem it's supported by in a manner that spans multiple markets. This then basically helps you to develop solutions with a broad impact, and also ensure that you're launching the companies in the ideal location to really get that maximum impact when taking off. And so this way of thinking is really highlighted by two examples of past and current work that we've done in the agriculture team. So we've built partnerships both in the UK and Costa Rica to launch ventures that target temperate and tropical agricultural systems respectively. So these are the FAST and TABI programs. And you can see here, we've then developed opportunity areas. So regenerative aquaculture as an example for FAST, or thermal coffee adaptation as an example for TABI, where we feel like the bioregional features of that country, as well as the technical expertise and the infrastructure there, provide the right launch pad for companies to take off and have global level impacts in similar bioregions. And just to give two examples of companies that have come out of our work, So from our work in Scotland, we have Rhizocore Technologies and Aquanzo who were built. So Rhizocore, who develop locally suited mycorrhizal fungi inoculants for tree growth and carbon sequestration, and Aquanzo, who develop sustainable marine protein. And so, please feel free to take a look at these companies in a bit more detail to get a sense of what we've done in the past for venture building. But you can see the growth that we've been achieving in both cases here. So hopefully this gives a bit of a picture about how DSV works as a company and our strategic vision around the agriculture sector. So now I really want to focus in on telling you about the specific opportunity area that we're recruiting to, which is high impact agricultural transplantation. So as the DSV agriculture sector, this opportunity area represents really our first step into arid bioregions for venture building. And the fundamental goal here that underpins it is to engineer agricultural systems that can enable productive cultivation in marginal environments at a scale and level of impact that was previously impossible. So that's the ambition here. And so how do we end up focusing on this challenge? Well, it started by thinking firstly about global issues associated with agricultural land use. So it's well established that the suboptimal distribution of crops at a global scale, and also poor practices that drive substantial and poor agricultural practices are driving substantial losses of agricultural land every year. And this has a ratcheting effect on the environment that's impacted by agriculture. So you see soil degradation, a loss of water availability, and a decrease in biomass and biodiversity. And this then leads to this continued push of agriculture into rich native ecosystems over time that creates a cycle of consumption. And when you look at these forces in dryland regions, you find that the food security of over 2 billion individuals is considered at threat due to desertification. And the picture is then even more challenging when you start looking forwards, as we aim to feed a growing population in terms of both caloric and nutritional needs, while also trying to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So we asked ourselves the question of how can we change the patterns of land use to tackle some of these pressures? And so firstly, we're already underway with building ventures that are focused on land regeneration. And so we've recently hired a founder who's working on that challenge so that we can stabilize and recover existing agricultural land. But when you consider the timeline and the scale of the challenge here, again, kind of going back to what I said earlier, we need to be using all of the tools in the box to deal with this problem. And so this is where our new opportunity area comes into play. So arid environments represent the most common habitat after oceans, covering at least 35% of the global land area. However, a huge amount of this land is underutilized, as it's considered to have a low developmental value, despite the fact that it's also hosting approximately 1.75 billion people, covering both developed and developing markets. But there's an enormous missed potential here. So, for example, looking to a specific country, in Oman, it's been estimated that you could at least triple the productive land area for agriculture with an absolute minimal impact upon nature. The problem is that the resource constraints mean that assumptions are made regarding the productive potential of these regions. But this can actually be subverted by applying the tools of agricultural engineering, through which sustainable and fertile cultivation can be enabled, and which you can then basically transform the value and the potential of marginal land. And if we can do this successfully, it's going to deliver a whole set of major outcomes for both people and the planet. So firstly, utilizing marginal lands can reduce the pressure on deforestation, support the protection of global ecosystem services. And then also from a human perspective, the value proposition of tools that can convert low value land into fertile agricultural land is clear, offering the scope to create climate resilient and localized food systems that are desperately needed in a changing world. So what's stopping us? So as I mentioned earlier, if we're going to achieve the fundamental goals of this opportunity area, we need to flip those environmental constraints of arid and marginal lands into opportunities. And ultimately, if you look across arid regions, what you see is that they're broadly characterized by high levels of solar energy. And when you combine this with a lack of vegetation cover, you get constraints generated. So things like large diurnal temperature ranges, so high in the day and low at night, low water availability. And when water is provided, you see a high rate of loss through evaporation and runoff, low soil quality and harsh radiation exposure. However, that same energy that drives the constraints can also help us overcome them. Most importantly, these environments are rich in both solar energy and salt water, whether that's sourced from the sea, if you're in coastal desert regions, or desalination outputs as you move inland. And with this, there's really scope to design solutions that are working at the food, water, energy nexus so that we can harness the riches that are presented in arid marginal environments to then transplant cultivation into that land. And to do so, we've been thinking about the opportunities to augment agricultural systems in specific ways. So augmentations can be viewed on a spectrum spanning from really simple modifications, so things like water buns, where you're basically digging the land to affect water retention, through to advanced protected environments, so things like well-developed water-cooled greenhouses. But ultimately, what all of these approaches are doing is focusing on the management of temperature and water use efficiency. And there are really three key intervention points that can be targeted. So the first being the climate and thinking about how you can modulate the environment for cultivation. Then the growth media, whether that be soil or water-based cultivation or a synthetic media. And then the biome, meaning the crop that you're producing and any associated organisms that are supporting that crop. And interventions could target open environments or protected environments or even water-based systems. And one of the things that I think is really exciting is to think about not only how do we enable that cultivation, but also the scope to use the cultivation to generate secondary benefits by reintroducing vegetation to marginal lands and the associated impacts that this is known to have on regenerating ecosystem services over time. And the potential in this sector hasn't been ignored. So there's already significant investment going into solving these constraints. So you can see large amounts of funding going into companies like Sundrop Farms or Desert Control as two examples, as well as large public funds and organizations like CGIAR investing heavily in enterprises in this area. And even just a few days ago, there were two enterprises that are focused on enabling agriculture in hostile environments that received recognition in the Earthshot Prize. But with that said, if we're going to be really ambitious in this area, as I think we should, in terms of scaling production systems to meet the nutritional demands of populations that are located in arid regions, we still have a way to go and plenty of opportunities to address. And there are really four key intervention points, which are centered around the augmentation of the climate, growth media, and biome, all with the fundamental goal of trying to enable environmental resilience and improved yield in these arid marginal environments. And so, firstly, I think a key area to explore is how do we make even more effective use of the available resources in arid marginal environments to create systems that aren't constrained by energy requirements or infrastructure to achieve large-scale production. And so there are interesting areas emerging. To give a couple of examples, one of the things that's really exciting is the advances happening in agrivoltaics. So the concept of developing kind of synergistic cooling effects by introducing photovoltaics together with vegetation underneath, where the shade benefits the crops and improves yields, and then the cooling provided by the vegetation helps improve the solar panel efficiency. And the emergence of new technologies for photovoltaics like wavelength selective materials, I think provide interesting opportunities to try and broaden the scope of crops that are compatible with these kind of systems. as well as offering cooling effects without the same shading trade-off that might make it infeasible for some crops at the moment. And then there's also really interesting recent work looking at how panels can be utilized for nighttime water capture in hyperarid environments. So taking advantage of the effects of radiative cooling off panels, which gives really exciting scope, I think, about integrating both energy capture, cultivation together with a really efficient water supply to support that production. Then alongside that, I think it's another key area is looking at how we better exploit salt water. So along with that really ample sunlight, this is the other really readily available resource, either in proximity to the coast or to desalination infrastructure. And you know, it's important to recognize here that one of the major problems currently in the Persian Gulf is the pumping of reject brine back into the sea. So finding solutions that harness reject brine, which appears to be an area that still remains underutilized, could give really interesting scope to then co-locate food production with existing infrastructure that's based around desalination in these arid regions. And this can then be harnessed in a number of ways. So if you're using salt water or reject brine, so using approaches like evaporative cooling in protected environments, or using it as a supply for open cultivation systems for wetland crops, or algal cultivation. And so I think all of these provide interesting routes, as well as thinking about, if you're bringing salt water into an environment, how can that be harnessed to also help support secondary revegetation? So alongside that resource capture, there's also a need to really actually make sure that we're utilizing the resources more effectively once we have them. And I think this involves making systems more dynamic and compatible with farming practices and machinery required for the scaling of production. So potential areas for interventions include things like thinking about modeling tools. So at the moment, there seems to be a lack of tools that can guide the design of environmental augmentations based upon climate and weather data, as well as then using that data to support the active management of these systems. So you can take inspiration from companies that are already developing these kind of bespoke products for irrigation systems. So taking data to design highly specialized irrigation, and think about how that can be applied in the same way for other environmental augmentations. And then alongside that, I think there's a question about how we can make augmentation structures both dynamic as well as having low energy costs. So there's currently a bit of a dichotomy between passive structures that can be introduced to protect crops, and then these more advanced structures that exist, with the need for low energy solutions that sit in the middle that allow an environment to be adapted to changing weather conditions, crop needs, and growth cycle needs over time. And so there are emerging systems, so things like passive evaporative downdraft cooling within protective environments that I think provide interesting options due to the capacity to modulate cooling effects over time with a really low energy requirement. So if you can create an automated system to control the water supply feeding into those downdrafts. And so those first two slides were very much thinking about how to modulate the climatic conditions, but I think there are also these intervention points around targeting the growth media and the biome. So there's already a number of companies looking at how to generate growth media in arid environments with low quality soil. But one of the major challenges here, I think, is how we make sure that that scales appropriately for really large scale impact. And so I think there's still some space to think about novel inputs that augment the soil. So designing products like polymer composites or hydrogels that are specialized to arid soils that can augment their water retention capacity to help with cultivation, as well as thinking about synthetic growth media that can be optimized for these arid environments. So thinking about whether that be a saltwater-based cultivation system or an entirely synthetic substrate that could be created. And then finally, I think we can also look to nature to consider how we confer resilience to agricultural systems through biological means. So a couple of examples of areas that I think would be really interesting to explore is firstly thinking about mining extremophiles, looking for novel inoculants, stimulants or suppressants that can be applied to crops to control stress tolerance with spatiotemporal precision, or identifying novel breeding targets from looking to extremophiles as well. Then on the kind of flip side of the same coin, I think it's also interesting to think about valorizing novel crops. So looking to the work of groups like Dry Grow, for example, who are targeting animal feed with water lentils grown in marginal land. And there seems to be a real lack of supportive tools to valorize environmentally resilient species through breeding. And strengthening in this area could open the door to novel crops for exploitation. And there are already kind of really interesting potential crops being uncovered. So to give one example, there was recently a halotolerant algae described that was isolated in the UAE that has a similar triacylglycerol profile to palm oil. So I think looking to currently non-domesticated crops for novel opportunities as well is a really interesting path. And it can also then be considered, I think, about how you stack different plants together within a single system for gains. So whether there's opportunities to combine algal cultivation together with higher plant cultivation into a single system for an overall net gain in the outputs that you're getting, as well as thinking about novel traits that could be targeted once you're dealing with protected structures. So thinking about how the crop architecture can be enhanced, or photosynthetic complementarity could be enhanced when going back to thinking about things like agrivoltaic systems. And so while each of these components could be a key target for doing something new, I think the other thing to highlight is that obviously for any intervention, the system needs to be considered in its totality to ensure that you get the desired impact. But with this explorative work that we've done, we believe that there really are plenty of high potential areas that are waiting to be exploited. And so with that, we're now at the stage of founder hiring. And so my invitation to you on the call is to come and join us in building novel ventures in this area that can enable thriving climate resilient food systems. And so I'd like to just tell you a little bit more now before wrapping up about the founder recruitment and what we're looking for someone in this role. So the job description is live at the moment, as some of you may have seen. But I'd like to just give a quick summary of what we're looking for in a founder to work on this opportunity area. And it really comes down to three key areas. So the first being the appropriate knowledge and technical expertise. So I anticipate that the ideal founder would be someone with a strong knowledge of how agricultural engineering principles can be applied. And that could either be looking from a biotic or an abiotic perspective, to overcome hostile conditions for cultivation. So dealing with challenges like temperature, water availability, growth media, or light intensity. And alongside this, we'd expect to see a deep technical expertise, whether that's a PhD or a master's or an equivalent professional research experience in an area that's connected to agricultural engineering. But the scope of this is really quite broad. So you could be coming from an environmental or mechanical engineering viewpoint, a microbiology, a crop science, or an agronomy viewpoint. And as you'll have seen from the approaches that we've highlighted, we're considering this challenge from those two perspectives of environmental engineering and biological engineering. But I think it's important to say that we wouldn't expect one individual to have deep technical expertise across the patch. We'd expect them to understand the sector, but the likelihood is that a co-founder would come in at some point and complement the individual's technical and commercial skill set to create the complete picture that's required for the company that gets developed. Alongside this, a desirable characteristic that we would be looking for, although it's not a necessity, is the commercial experience. So that would be ideally professional experience in an environmental engineering or agriculture company or startup. And especially if you had any professional experience of engineering agriculture for marginal environments, that would have you really well set for taking on this opportunity area. But I think the most important thing to highlight really is the final piece, which is that that skill set and the desire and the drive to build a company and have a huge positive impact on sustainable agriculture. So we don't expect you to be coming in with a specific company idea or an IP in advance. Like Ed mentioned, we're looking for someone who has the right mindset and skills and drive, and we'll then work together with you to come up with novel approaches that form the basis of a venture-backable company with that top-level outcome of enabling fertile agriculture in arid marginal environments. And so we're open to applications now on Workable. So I think the key point I wanted to highlight is recognizing, obviously, the time of year. We expect applications to be assessed on a rolling basis from right at the start of January. So I'd encourage you to really try and get your application in at some point this month, if you're able to, so that you're at the front of the queue for when we kick off the assessment process. And it's broken down into 3 key stages. So stage 1 is a case study and interview to probe your technical knowledge and your creative thinking within this opportunity area, to explore really your ability to surface new opportunities for venture building by taking a first principles approach to thinking about the space. And this is then followed by 2 subsequent interviews that are geared more towards other elements that are really key to be a successful company founder. And these really center around these core characteristics of determination and magnetism. And our offer to you is ultimately that we pay you to start your own company. So we provide a stipend that gives you a guaranteed income prior to you receiving any pre-seed investment. And not only this, but we also are deeply involved in working together with our founders throughout the process of venture creation. And this really includes 3 key areas. So the first is exploring the potential approaches for a venture-backable company. So we offer mentorship and guidance through weekly deep dive sessions, as well as access to our knowledge base and our global network of experts and a community of other science founders who are going through the same process as you would be in launching their own companies, as well as a curated collection of resources and tools to really help you to refine your potential approaches for the company that you form. Then we also support you with building your team. So we offer co-founder sourcing and assessment via our proprietary tools, alongside advisory board sourcing, and then the co-development of technical roadmap and go-to-market strategy, as well as support on technical and commercial proofs that you have to do as you start to really hone in on what your company is going to be. And when you're ready to then secure capital and focus on that technical proof of concept work, we offer that £250,000 of pre-seed investment, as well as access to our industry network and advice and support on follow-on fundraising strategy, and access to a community of founders that are working across our company portfolio. And so if you come and join us in doing this, here's what you can expect of a typical timeline for founders working at DSV. I think it's important to highlight that this is a flexible process. Some people go faster, some people go slower, but this gives you a flavor of what it looks like. So the first 3 months would really be focused on that deconstructing of the opportunity area to identify where there is neglect and opportunities among within the current ecosystem, and from which a short list of approaches will be generated. And this then gets refined even further over time to the point where that most promising approach is identified at the end of the 6-month period, at which point you have a real clear view of what this company is likely to look like. So you can then go out and start thinking about co-founder recruitment and building out your team. Then from month 6 to 12, the focus shifts to really developing that technical and commercial proof for the approach, and developing the investment readiness of the company. And so then whilst, like I said, timelines can vary, it's around the 12-month mark onwards that you'd start thinking about incorporation, after which we would continue to support you as a portfolio company within DSV as you continue your growth and raising funding from external sources. And throughout this process, that I just want to highlight is you'll be building your company with the support of not only the entirety of the DSV community that you can tap into and external advisors, but also working really closely with the core agriculture team. So that includes myself and Ed, who you've met on the call, but also Chris and Angel. So Chris is our head of strategic partnerships, and he comes from an aquaculture background. And Angel, who is the other associate who works alongside me and the team, and he has really strong expertise in plant biology and plant genetics. And so you'll have this surrounding community that makes sure you're really well supported as you start to flesh out your ideas and build your company from the ground up. And so finally, just to close, I want to just come back to this map that we started off with. So I really believe that the scale of the opportunity here is huge. If we can develop technologies that confer resilience to agriculture in arid and marginal environments in a manner that's sustainable and scalable, we can transform the perception of these regions from one that views them as hostile environments into one where there's an untapped potential that provides a really significant value proposition. And the benefits in terms of minimizing the impacts upon nature from the growth of agricultural land, calling back to the example of work that's been done in places like Oman and scoped out the land that could be used with minimal impact, as well as creating more localized food systems as a result, is enormous in terms of the outcomes we can achieve for both people and the planet. And so hopefully you feel inspired to take this opportunity on. And I just invite you to come on that journey with us. And so thank you so much for listening. I'm going to now open up the floor to questions. We have myself and Ed here, along with Santa, who is our director for talent at Deep Science Ventures. And I just, before taking on the questions, want to also note that a follow-up email will be sent to everyone who's signed up for the webinar, including a link to the job post, the content on our website regarding this opportunity area, and a recording of the webinar. But thank you for your time, and we can take questions now. Would you like to give a quick introduction to yourself, Santa?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, can you just give me a thumbs up if you hear me? Fantastic. So I'm joining you from London, from a shared office space, so please don't mind some background noise. I look after talent at DSE broadly, so I work across sectors and together with the Agri team to find and engage and finally bring on board and helps founders in their founding journey, and most importantly, to help founders to find co-founders for their ventures. I've been with the company pretty much since it was started, almost 6 years ago. And during that time, we've hired well over 150 founders across all of our 4 sectors. And we have a pretty fantastic success rate in the sense that 80% of the companies that we've spun out are still going strong. So I think that should give some extra courage in taking the leap for those who are considering this. My background, very broadly, I've worked for all of my professional career with early stage startups, working in startups, as well as supporting innovators through different accelerators and incubators. So in short, it's been good 10 years in specifically identifying talent suited for early stage venture building.
Thanks a lot, Santa.
I'll jump in.
Will, I'm going to line you up with a couple of technical questions that have come in. And whilst you get some answers to those together, I'm also going to answer a few quick fire. So one has come in from Chloe Lewis. Chloe asks, climatic conditions, as you've described, are a challenge that you are addressing, but how do you plan on augmenting the nutritional content of these soils beyond hydrogen or I guess water recency? We have another question from Erhan, who is asking, I was wondering what DSV's genetic technology or nanotechnology opinions are with regard to agricultural development. I'm going to leave those with you, and in the meantime, I'm just going to answer a few more general questions. So one has come in from Christopher, who asks, are further submissions being accepted for Tabby? I saw that on LinkedIn. TABI is the Tropical Agriculture and Bioeconomy Initiative. This is a program that we're running across multiple different opportunity areas in Costa Rica. So that's focused on the tropical bioregions of the planet. Will earlier mentioned that we had a program in Scotland that's called FAST, that's focused on our temperate program or temperate agricultural and bioeconomy needs. And TABI is focused on different needs in the tropics. The answer to your question, Chris, is yes, we are still accepting submissions. We have one opportunity area left for that, which is the 21st century crops for circular bioeconomies. I'll put a few links in the chat for that, but basically what we're thinking there is how do we develop new crops, crop traits, or production technologies for the agricultural needs of the 21st century, which are far beyond the scope of what we have considered during the 20th century and anything that has come before it. A second question comes from Luke. What relation does DSV have to their startups? Are they majority or minority shareholders? Do they have board or C-suite representatives? Great question. So we are minority shareholders in the startup companies. At the point of incorporation of any DSV company, 80% is assigned to the founding team, and 20% is then split between DSV and any of the funding partners that supported the program and provided funds for that to happen. So they're essentially paying for positions at DSV, including founding analyst positions. DSV can take a board seat if the founding team invites DSV to do so. We don't always do it, but we'll do it if the founders want. But we will not take a C-suite or an executive position. We're effectively at the point of incorporation there to provide as much support as you need or want. And this includes long-term recruitment using a lot of the in-house tools that we've developed to find additional co-founders or employees that could support the growth of your technical or your commercial teams. We'll be there for board meetings if you need. We'll be there for fundraising support, developing decks for customers, or developing decks for investors. Everything that you need, we can offer that, but only on an as-needed basis. I wonder, Will, if I can hand back to you for the question from Chloe on climatic conditions being something we've recognized, but nutritional content of the soils not being something that's come up yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to say on this point is, so we've done some exploration about ways that you could consider achieving slow release fertilization in these kind of soils. So come across some interesting technologies. So things like, depending on the conditions of pyrolysis for biochar production, if you use kind of salty biomass, you can get structures that effectively act as really slow release for fertilizers that can then be embedded in the ground. So you get that slow release into arid soils that's been tested out by some researchers. I didn't want to focus on it too much in this presentation. I think there's certainly things to be done there, but it would actually be for the founder, I think, to take a step back on the and look at the overall picture of, if our goal is to enable meeting the nutritional needs in these regions with localized food production, do we even need to depend on, well, I say, do we even need to depend on the soil? But is the first step to work on soil-based systems, or is there actually another target for either, you know, either a saltwater-based system or a synthetic system that provides a more attractive route to achieving the desired impact? So they would really need to break down the sector right from that top level of, like, if we're going to meet this top level goal, what are the key constraints? And they may come to the conclusion that actually, if we're going to have any hope of achieving these big picture outcomes, we need to firstly deal with the nutritional content of the soils, and that might be the key enabling piece that then leads to the formation of a company. So it kind of connects to the question about nanotechnology as well, and nano fertilizers. So I think there are a lot of interesting technologies developing. I think the key thing is that they're designed appropriately for these kind of sandy soils and have the right characteristics so that it can be retained in those soils and have that slow release if you're going to try and introduce cultivation to those areas. And so that kind of brings me on to Erhan's question regarding genetic technology and nanotechnology. So again, it's really about finding firstly, really refining where the key constraints sit for achieving the high level goals, and then considering the different technologies that are available. And that could include genetic technology, depending on the constraint you're trying to solve. And I know we have an opportunity area in TABI at the moment that's really focused on utilizing emerging genetic tools for novel bioeconomy target traits in crops. So this is an area that we're actively exploring, and I think it has a key role to play in agricultural development. But I would flip it on its head in terms of, we first really need to understand what the opportunity or the constraint we're trying to address is, and then whether genetic technologies or nanotechnologies provide the best means of reaching that desired outcome. So absolutely, it's something in the toolbox, depends on the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one opinion I would have on the genetic side of things is obviously the regulatory constraint that you create depending on the nature of those genetic technologies, which severely limit market access. Now, obviously, we try to be agnostic to technology in terms of outcome, but we can't be agnostic to what the market and the regulatory agencies around the world are telling us. With nanotechnology, I think the jury's still out on what that regulatory environment will look like. It could be quite permissive, or we might see it go in the other direction, depending on how those agencies choose to handle that. So we tend to be quite bullish on the potential impacts of both, but cautious about what the regulatory environment is telling us. I'm going to keep going with the questions. So one question comes in from Rajiv. Are we looking for people and companies in the UK alone or globally? I would say in terms of looking for people, we are looking for people from all around the world, whoever has the right set of qualifications, skills, and enthusiasm to start a business in the right part of the world. And I think the proof is in the pudding with the places that we're operating, both in the UK and abroad already. And the potential for this particular OA, I think, can take us even further afield into interesting parts of the planet that we have not yet deployed companies into. But in terms of looking for companies, we aren't necessarily looking for companies that exist or technologies or teams that already exist. We are a venture creator, so we're looking to create new teams for technologies, products, and services that should exist but don't. So I've seen a lot of questions come in already saying, oh, we hold a patent to a new cultivation technique. How does this play into the DSV ecosystem? I would say it's not a great fit in the sense that we're not looking to commercialize existing technology. That's not the kind of firm that we are. We're looking to create something that's brand new. But we welcome discussions with people who've created interesting things. We've got a question which I think might be for you, Will.
Sure.
This comes from Juan Carlos. He is a PhD in agricultural microbiology. He works with microbe-plant interactions in bacterial quorum sensing to regulate pathogenicity of microbes and promote systemic induced resistance. He lives in Colombia, and he believes that he can get this approach to improve soil undergoing drought with bacteria. But how could he figure out what the ideal conditions would be for the experimental component? I believe that's the nature of your question, Juan Carlos. If there's anything that you want to modify about that, let me know. Will, I think let's just give him 1 minute if he wants to add something there. Another one comes in from Vesela. She's an expert in desert greening. Why would she apply for this role? What's the gain for me? I know what works in what region, but I also know what happens in which country, and you cannot get land to scale. This is the issue. Is there a way to apply as a team? Do we need to be in the UK? Is remote fine, or can I just advise you on this and your future teams? Interesting.
Shall I take those bits one by one?
Yeah, I think Sandra, if you want to jump in as well at any point.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the gain, I think it's really what is offered to you in that time that you work with us as a founding analyst. So the fact that we're paying you to take that 12 months or however much time you need to really have the mental headspace as well as the financial support through that time to think about where where existing constraints sit and where potential novel opportunities for that could be, and generate entirely novel ideas that you think could solve for kind of high level outcomes. I get your point regarding, each country has specific contexts, and that it means that a singular solution may not scale across all of those different areas. I think what the key of the work that you would do in that time where you're scoping out the possible approaches is to try and uncover where there are commonalities across different areas and try and identify where there are key constraints that actually do sit in multiple regions, where if you unlock that, okay, then agriculture is still going to look different in those environments, but this technology has kind of provided a key enabling step to achieve really productive agriculture where there are kind of common environmental constraints. So I think that's kind of the benefit, right, of having the time to think about this sector and really break it down into the detail required to uncover those potential opportunities. You don't need to be in the UK. I think we've already touched upon that. If you are interested in just being involved in an advisory capacity and not in the actual venture building process, we'll be sharing our contact details. I'd be happy to chat with you because we are, always looking at our advisory network. And if we think it's a good fit, that's something that we can explore for sure. So yeah, happy to discuss that with you. Is there anything you want to add on that, Ed?
Yeah. Why would you apply for this role if you already feel like you have a good handle on this opportunity area? I think one of the biggest issues that people face in starting a business is they oftentimes start the wrong business, and this can cost a lot of time. And time is the thing that you never get back. Like money, you can always come up with a better business and start one down the line, but you really want your first business or the business that you're working on today to be the one that works straight out the door. And the program is designed to give you the opportunity to explore multiple ideas and stress test those with many different experts from many different environments, whether they're financial, legal, agriculture, or some of the other technical domains that are going to be very relevant. And you get the opportunity to see which of the ideas that are all probably very good stand that test of multiple different people feeding into it, so that you're only left with the best, the one that has the highest chance of succeeding. And so although you're splitting some founding equity with DSV, and we intend for you to bring on at least one co-founder, rather than saying you're doing it all on your own and being a sole co-founder on a business that you designed yourself, the program allows you to really accelerate that journey and make sure that you've got the right people around you, that you like the team, you've got product market fit, you've actually established relationships with customers before even incorporating the company, which is something that can take many years in a solo startup. So I'd say that's like one of the key benefits, which I really suffered in my first company. We didn't have product market fit for the first 2 years. And that really took a toll on the team, as well as our cap table, in terms of how we were basically just consulting, trying to figure out exactly what we would do, and eventually then moving into a technology domain that made sense. So I think having that start is really useful for any founding analyst on the program. Yes, you can be remote. We have founding analysts all around the world. Currently working, well, agriculture is currently working across 10 time zones at the moment.
I think you're probably best placed to answer the next question from Christopher, Ed, if you're happy to. Could you flesh out the brand new generation more? At what point in founder establishment hiring would ideas, potential IP of founder be debriefed and then vetted among the DSV team and then filed or established?
Okay, so the assumption I'm making here is you've got a good idea and people are excited about it. and it kind of fits with this opportunity area thesis. Fantastic. You should probably apply for this program. If you wanted to keep going with that existing idea, you would essentially have to pass the burden of proof that your idea is better than any other possible idea that could exist that doesn't yet. So we would really challenge you on this program to think about the principles that make your current idea fantastic, step back from those, and then apply those same principles to multiple different technology domains to see if you could beat it. Because it may very well be that you do have a good idea, but the technology isn't quite there or the market isn't there yet. Maybe you're too early. Maybe no one's investing in that. Maybe the intellectual property has been granted, but there could be a whole set of competing intellectual property that might have slightly better performance, which investors could go after and would be more likely to raise. So you would essentially be joining the program as a paid founding analyst to answer those questions with a view on getting the personal confidence you would need to keep going with that idea, whilst also building a lot of support from external parties, including DSV, who would say, yeah, you do have a good idea. Ideally, you would find, yeah, this existing thing does really make a lot of sense and you should take it forward. But it's more likely you would find something that doesn't exist yet that might be the best thing to put your chips on. I want to see if I've answered all elements of that question yet. At what point in founder establishment hiring would ideas or potential IP be debriefed and vetted? Will, I wonder if you can go back to the slide with the timeline.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in months 1 to 3, we basically hand you all of the research that Will has been talking to you about today. And we ask the question, why are we wrong? Because we probably are in a great many things. And as an expert, you can bring to this really interesting answers. And then we'll go through this collaborative process of determining a list of approaches that could solve the problem. And it's quite likely that your existing IP or existing idea would be one of these possible approaches that should be a candidate for eventually becoming a company development project. But we would want to have at least 2 additional approaches that would be good competitors. And you might come up with dozens of these things in the first 3 months. But by the end of the first 3 months, you should be narrowing that down to 3 to 5 solid approaches that could become companies. And these would be vetted across the entire DSV team. And that would be a sort of formal decision point about what we take forward. Prior to that, we would be talking about this on the regular and having a lot of regular discussions, either on a weekly basis with the team or one-on-one with individuals in the team. I see a follow-up to this, which is, how should I share knowledge with you? I believe that our technology should be looked at. We answer quite a bit of some of the open questions. Shoot us an email. I'm happy to keep talking. I think that would be best.
Yeah, just to say on that point, and also address Vasella's point beneath, my contact details will be shared in the follow-up email. So you'll have a line to get in touch after this webinar. And yeah, exactly. Let's talk.
Okay, so I want to go back to Juan Carlos's question. Who said there was nothing further to add? Let's move it around. So I guess the question is how to figure out if bacteria in dry soils I live in Colombia, which has dry lands. I have an approach to improve droughts using soil bacteria. However, they're not usually in dry soil conditions. So what's the experimental component for this? Will, do you have any thoughts on this?
I am not sure whether I'll be able to give a particularly useful answer off the cuff, I'm afraid.
I'm not sure I would either, but it might be one for Ruby. So yeah, Ruby is a founding analyst who's working in topsoil regeneration. And he's part of an opportunity area that's been functional for a few months. He's a specialist in soil health and land regeneration. So I think if you can send us an email, we'd be happy to connect you with them and see where that discussion goes. Thanks for your question. Sorry we couldn't answer it. Definitely need some more background there. All right, Vasella has come back and she asks, I know a few that do exist across regions. The problem is to get access to the land or desert land to scale, because it's government owned in most cases. I've been negotiating with governments for 6 years. Land is not for sale. This will be a problem everywhere. Desert is not given for free, only around universities, and this is where it ends. Let's talk. Really interesting. So this would be an example of a market or regulatory constraint that we would need to contend with. I'd be really interested to know what country you are citing this experience from, and if that's something that you see scale across multiple regions and different nations. I think you're probably right. The one area where I would say it seems like there is opportunity is with companies that own vast tracts of desert or arid land already. And in particular, mining companies seem to have that kind of profile, where they own this land that is fairly unproductive, but they're not really doing anything with it, but are questioning how could we make it more productive.
Yeah, Chris has added beneath it, in the US Southwest, there are opportunities there.
Certainly, and unfortunately, more and more opportunities as farmland becomes increasingly unproductive in that part of the world and is being sold off. All right, there was a question from Rajiv, who I see is still on, which I wanted to answer, which is, there's really two parts to this. The first is, does DSV have philanthropic or government money that it can give to founding analysts? And the second element is, what's the business model for DSV? So we do not have philanthropic money that we can just automatically assign to any portfolio company or any company that's in development. We will help portfolio companies or founding analyst teams that are about to start a company to write grant applications. We can help review those. We can help push them in the right direction. Say, hey, these groups in the government or this philanthropy is interested in this area. We're happy to make some introductions and see where it goes. But we have never been given philanthropic funds that we can automatically assign. So we make an investment from our own internal fund. And we also have limited partners, LPs, who can also invest alongside us. And we have a network of investors with close association to DSV who've invested with us in portfolio companies before. So we can make all of these introductions and grease the wheels. One thing that is looked on quite favorably from the DSV investment committee point of view is, in addition to having potential customers who sign letters of intent saying, if you have this product, we would buy it, do you also have that same kind of support from government agencies or philanthropies or even granted grant applications? And we've had companies before who, even before we've incorporated the company, doesn't exist yet, even before we've decided to invest, they've been able to secure philanthropic or government agency grant funding on the strength of their ideas and their proposal. And then all that needs to happen is the company now needs to be incorporated. The second question is, what's the business model of DSV? So there's a few different areas in which DSV can make money. First and foremost is, of course, the exit value of portfolio companies, which at some point down the line, we would expect those companies to be acquired or to go public, and DSV can sell its minority shareholdings. A second is, how do we make money today in the short term? How does this happen? So we really have two different customer types, either corporate partners or philanthropic or government partners. To a corporate partner, which we often call a strategic partner, we can go to them and say, based on all the research that we've done, we understand that in your supply chain, you have the following issues. And this is not only costing you in terms of financial bottom line, but the current system that you have is not ideal for environmental, social, or governance metrics whatsoever. And what we would propose is rather than you spending tens of millions of dollars in trying to solve that problem internally as a slow corporate juggernaut, where you know your internal R&D is inefficient, what you can do instead is hire us at a fraction of the cost, and we will start one or more companies aligned to a novel opportunity area designed around the needs that you have. And those companies, these strategic partners, are some of those groups that we can split that founding equity with. And typically they are also the customers of the companies that we start as well, because we're solving a problem for a large commercial organization with a new company. They have a close incentive to work together once that company is started, so that the startup company can start providing products to solve that problem. And the partner can also have some shares in that solution as well. It's quite an elegant solution to this issue of internal innovation that can be quite difficult for large corporate organizations. The second customer type is really philanthropies or government organizations, which are very much mission aligned. We're able to approach them and say, we know that you are looking to implement a particular policy around land regeneration or establishing a bioeconomy in your country. Well, we've read that policy, we understand it, and we have ideas on what companies would be needed to stimulate and support the execution of that policy. And we'll essentially start providing that service to them to build companies and build out their ecosystem or implement the policy. I hope that answers your question, Rajiv. All right. All right, so Vasela is in the Middle East and North Africa. So she's been working in Egypt and Algeria, Central Asia, and she's been all over. And she says the same issue is also true in Australia, although she hasn't worked there, but she does have connections. In general, she's saying that anything bigger than a farm is going to be difficult for land access. Definitely think we should talk. Thanks for bringing that up. One question from Luke is, do you accept joint applications? If you have a co-founder in mind, if successful, when would applicants start? We do not accept joint applications. We don't accept team applications. We're really looking for individuals. We start with one founding analyst, and then once that founding analyst has selected an approach in conjunction with the DSV team, at that point, we would then expand to co-founder recruitment. So if successful, when would applicants start? As soon as possible. When could additional applicants join as a sort of a co-founder through the program? Again, we'd say as soon as possible. I mean, we could start co-founder recruitment within 3 months if everything moves quickly. The objective is to actually start a company within 9 months. 12 months is more realistic. Sometimes it can go up to 15 months. But really, it's hard to provide a definite timeline without seeing the progress that a candidate is making. Gregor asks, does DSV routinely follow their money in future investment rounds to maintain their minority stake? It really depends on the performance of the company. So if the company is in the top 10% of portfolio, then DSV may take up its pro rata right to put some additional investment into the company. But typically it does not. It's really looking at starting the companies and bringing on investors who have much deeper pockets and also a lot more experience scaling those companies into larger markets. So in fact, in some portfolio companies, even at the point of incorporation, we've got out of the way and not taken up our full investment right just to allow other operators, other investors to come in who know a space much better than we ever could. But in general, we are looking to do more follow-up funding as well. Cool. So watch the space. I think that might be.
I think that's it in terms of the questions, Ed. So, I mean, the thing to say is, like I mentioned, there will be a follow-up email and there will be contact details. So any questions that come to mind, we've already got a couple of people that we're definitely going to be having more conversations with. But any questions that come to mind, please get in touch and we can have those discussions offline as well. yeah, I think the only thing to say is thank you again for joining, and for the really engaged, interesting Q&A as well at the end. It was great to see that people have come and yeah, are as excited about this area as we are. So just a big thank you, and hopefully hear from you all soon, either through the recruitment process or other means. Thank you.